We got booted from stuff like Office 365 and Azure and all that stuff. But what we did retain access to was Proofpoint. So we basically were able to use our access in Proofpoint to then send in a payload, and we just pushed it through Proofpoint and had someone actually detonate that payload. So kind of an interesting twist of event there, but that was an interesting one for sure.
I'm Steve Stonebreaker, and this is Ephemeral Security. Would you please state your name and what you do?
Yeah, my name is Devin Casadey. I'm a security consultant, mainly focus on red team exercises, so kind of run the whole gamut of all the different aspects of penetration testing, network, web app, wireless, all that stuff. So lots of fun.
Awesome. Why are you passionate about information security?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's kind of two facets to this, right? So there's the kind of the greater good, and then the personal stuff as well. So I guess starting with the greater good, everything these days is really kind of affected by security. We've got toasters connected to the internet. We've got everybody's information's out there, doing digital things, whether it's for banking or just every single thing now is just attached to the internet. It's extremely important, and being a consumer of all that stuff too, I definitely want to make that safe, and being able to be a part of that is definitely rewarding to know that hopefully making a difference, making things more secure, helping out in that regard. And then when it comes to the personal aspect, um, I just love the dynamic challenges. Every day is basically a different challenge, different hurdle to kind of overcome. Whether it's how to get into something, or some custom code that you need to write, or it's just really cool, different day to day, which is it's exciting stuff.
Awesome. When did you first use a computer?
So I am a child of the 80s, before the internet got big there. I think my earliest memory is probably using I think it was the old i386 PCs maybe. My dad was a real OG programmer. He used to do a lot of assembly programming for mainframes and all this stuff. He basically got me into the computing world, when I was extremely young, maybe less than 5. So bringing me to different computer conferences and or computer fairs to where you're buying all these parts, and kind of a neat little thing there, and bringing them back, kind of assembling them. But at that time, I was kind of just more into the games. I wanted to taste of that Mario Brothers from Nintendo. I wanted to play games on computers. So probably the earliest, just all that stuff, getting into early gaming on computers. So fun stuff.
That's super exciting. And how did you end up in InfoSec?
So my background's kind of weird. I definitely did not go about entering InfoSec the traditional way, quote. Like I kind of mentioned for the previous question, I was kind of always into computers growing up. Even when I started to go into college, my goal was to become a computer engineer. But then I realized that I really don't like math that much when it comes to all the calculus and all this stuff that was going on in there. So I kind of got detracted from that and didn't really want to do it anymore. Basically, my freshman year, I didn't even get to touch any computer classes. No one really turned me on to computer science, which I think would have probably been a better route. But I ended up changing my major, and in a weird kind of turn of events, I actually majored in Japanese language and literature. So basically the furthest thing removed from tech, right? So fast forward, I've basically been working jobs, at a video game company, not doing anything technical, a lot of kind of language related stuff, international business. I just got really bored. I was like, I still like computers a lot. I want to get back into this stuff and learn something new. So after about 8 years or so at that job, I said, I'm going to quit and just kind of dive into some tech stuff instead. So my buddy at the time, he was doing some point of sales installations for some major fast food restaurants and other chains and stuff, and kind of took me under his wing. So kind of used that opportunity to kind of get my feet wet in the field, and then really kind of put a lot of focus on learning network stuff, and started to teach myself Python and other coding. But someone was like, oh, why don't you check out cybersecurity? It's really big. I was like, yeah, that's a good idea. Well, let me see what's going on in there, and started researching kind of different directions. And then I stumbled upon the whole penetration testing thing. I'm like, what? Like this is a thing. Like it's amazing. Like you can hack and not go to jail. So I was like, this is fantastic. So really started to put in a lot of effort, kind of just learning everything I could in that regard. And yeah, fast forward to now, it's a passion. It's something that I love, and doesn't even feel like I'm working. So
So what are you doing now?
So interesting. Right now, I'm actually in transition period. I'm about to get back into a new role at SecureWorks. I'm going to be a managing principal consultant there as a global tech lead for the Red Team. So kind of taking over that service should be a lot of fun. It's pretty exciting times.
You were at SecureWorks before, and now you're coming back to kind of run things, or?
Oh yeah, and I wouldn't say completely run things, but specifically for like the Red Team service, I'll be dealing a lot with that and kind of it'll basically be my baby. So basically can direct and help kind of establish the TTPs there for the team, and help develop stuff, and also hop into the operations as well. So it should be a lot of fun.
Interesting. So what's the best way you found to hone your skills?
So I guess kind of going back to kind of how I got to where I was, it's kind of an awesome time now with how many resources there are out there. I remember when I was in college, way back when, and had the idea to, put Linux on my machine for the first time. And this is before YouTube and before all like the really awesome resources. So I struggled a lot with trying to kind of pick that up on myself, buy some books, but didn't really help that much. The amount of resources that are available today is just amazing. I would say for me, it's definitely a lot of reading, but it's also a lot of hands-on stuff. So hitting labs, building things, coding things myself, as much hands-on time as I can get, I think is kind of the best way for me to kind of learn that stuff and really dig deep. So I'm a huge advocate for Hack the Box and all those kind of labs and stuff. I think they do a lot to teach kind of out of the box thinking, and kind of the mindset and perspective there for what you need in order to be a pretty efficient penetration tester and all that. And I don't think it's the only way. Some of them, obviously some of the situations are kind of contrived and not always very realistic, I suppose, if you're looking at like CTFs and stuff. But I think they do help a lot. So definitely attribute a lot to those kind of labs or vulnerable machines that kind of got me to where I am. And yeah, I still enjoy doing them today. But yeah, it's a lot of good building stuff. It's fun.
Got it. So from when you started doing red teaming, so was red teaming and penetration testing, is that the same thing
Um,
or not?
so I guess this gets into semantics, right? So it's a lot of I guess if you ask someone else, they might tell you something different. To me, it's kind of different. So I would say you could kind of absorb penetration testing into red team exercises as a whole, perhaps. But if you want to, I guess, get into more of the semantics again, red team would equate to maybe more like the adversary emulation or simulation type aspects, where the goals are slightly different from what a penetration test would typically focus on. So penetration testing, less focused on detection and response, and really more of kind of rooting out the issues, whether that be misconfigurations, vulnerabilities that are present, and kind of following that attack chain. Whereas, red team exercises, and again, I'm speaking more in terms of adversary emulations or simulations, really kind of focused on testing the blue side as to their detection and response capabilities. And that could not only just be the personnel, like the security team, but obviously also the security tools, devices, and the team as a whole. So that would be more or less my definition of that, or how to separate those.
Are your teams ever asked to emulate specific APTs in their tactics? Because I think that some companies, they might be more aware of like what are the top five APTs that might be targeting my organization, given my like vertical. Would they ask you to try to emulate those, or is that too specific?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the engagement and what the client is looking to get out of everything. So sometimes in the past, they're like, "Oh, can you kind of emulate stuff surrounding like the solar winds aspect, or like all these ADFS attacks and stuff that were happening in a different regard, or certain different things like that." So I guess it depends. Personally, I think it can be kind of tough because a lot of EDRs or a lot of the detection stuff that's out there is really going to focus on those kind of like known bads. So, once an APT is out there for a while and they're studying their TTPs, establishing, signatures for whatever the tools are using or the behavior. So it kind of gets shut, your red team operation kind of gets shut down if you're limited to only sticking to those kind of TTPs, right? So if the client's kind of worried about those things, I feel like that's better geared towards more of like a purple team exercise, in my opinion. But again, it's really going to come down to what they want. And if they want to specifically test their controls and detection capabilities in regards to like very specific TTPs, and that's great. But I think a lot of it's really going to, the bigger benefit is going to be to really look at those unknowns, kind of different TTPs that they might not have seen before, to kind of keep them on their toes, and for a new attack that's coming, right? So that's, in my opinion, the more important aspect overall for the exercise.
Got it. Yeah, this is a good segue, I guess, into my next question. So you're right. Yeah, most EDR vendors are good at detecting the known APT techniques. I think MITRE did something recently where they compared, I think it was like 20 different EDR vendors against, I think, like 4 or 5 different APT, like Sandworm and stuff like that. And then they were all rated on that. And they had a few rounds or whatever to tweak their products. But when you think about like the MITRE attack framework and things like Palo Alto, they have their traps, right? And so if you're trying to use like your LOL bins or whatever, they're gonna immediately flag something, right? If someone's calling like cert util or nslookup or indept.exe or whatever, right? So do you routinely test different EDR vendors against a range of attacks in the MITRE attack framework categories?
So I guess I would split this up into two kind of separate answers, maybe. So first is, for red team exercises, or whether that be adversary emulation simulations or penetration tests, it could be really a wide variety of different things that we're encountering. So we might not really know going into an engagement, what kind of EDR is present in that environment. So it's kind of be ready. And again, if it's a penetration test, you're less worried about using your big and bad TTPs, the real stealthy OPSEC focused ones. Whereas for the red team exercises, you're probably going to want to bring out your big guns and try hard to get around all that stuff. But at the end of the day, we don't really know until we land on a box, what that environment's going to look like. So you kind of got to be ready for everything. But in terms of like specifically testing, one vendor over another, there's definitely some lab work done, but more for, I guess, for the red side to know how to develop stuff to be ready for those kind of OPSEC focused engagements, right? But then, I also have a unique kind of perspective too, because, I did work for 2 different EDR companies. So you kind of have a different view, kind of more hands-on approach to that stuff. And in one regard in the past, something that I was taking charge of and had a lot of experience with is basically setting up kind of frameworks to basically run through known TTPs, common kind of attacks, different attack chains, different aspects of that, to see where things need to get tuned up. But it's kind of fun. So basically, kind of like the atomic red team type thing. Familiar with that? So basically, what I wanted to do was kind of separate out the different tactics and everything like that, and bring them up in their own modules. So if you're focused on network type stuff, maybe you've got a whole bunch of similar things grouped together for like LDAP type activity, or you're looking specifically towards endpoint stuff and focusing out all about, LSAS dumping or stuff like that. Creating those modules and then basically making it so that way the blue team or the people that are really focused on developing and making signatures on the EDR can just replicate that stuff over and over again. So that way it's kind of they don't really need the red team consultants in there all the time. They can kind of just take that, run with it, and then kind of see, what needs to be tuned up. And what was pretty fun was that basically made this flow where once they kind of established some new signatures for things that need to be tuned up, it'd get kind of tossed back to the red team consultants to come up with bypasses. So then, new modules are created that have bypasses for those things, and then it's just kind of cat and mouse. So it's kind of fun. And again, we're not really, the goal was not to have the biggest and baddest techniques that we would normally reserve for our OPSEC focused, want to be stealth kind of engagements. It was more just to get the kind of core stuff down that, should be caught from your run of the mill kind of pen tests. And, even some APTs that are extremely soppy. I mean, there's some really interesting write-ups that I've seen for certain activity that I'm just like, this is crazy. So catching those things, the low-hanging fruits and what you'd expect.
Right. That must have been really fun to make. I know I would enjoy making something like that.
Yeah, it's cool, and it's also an interesting kind of approach to where you can have stuff on the network side too. So set up an attack box and kind of collect those PCAP data as you're running it to kind of pass it off to the teams. That way they can look for network signatures, and then you also can kind of rig stuff to interact with the endpoint. I use Python at the time for that thing, accessing via WinRM with those libraries, and then kind of messing around on the endpoint, generating some more telemetry and noise there to see what's getting caught on the endpoint. But yeah, it is kind of fun, and get to kind of make these cool little it's like you're almost creating a full automated solution to like a hack the box problem. So it's like all kind of like contrived. Maybe you're setting up just a vulnerable server and then kind of just mapping out this whole attack chain. So as like a scenario, it's like, okay, you've got a IIS server that's kind of vulnerable to this deserialization stuff. What does that look like in totality in terms of the overall chain from the genesis to that to Privesk or something like that? So you're looking at the network aspect where, okay, you're attacking this application. You're landing on the server as probably like a service account, maybe doing some token manipulation to escalate and then dumping LSAS or something like that. So you got this kind of cool kind of whole chain module that you kind of just look at and kind of build upon. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
It does sound fun. Did you use like Vagrant, or what did you use to kind of manage building your virtual machines and stuff?
So a lot of that was actually manual. So I kind of got away from it. It got passed off to more of a research centric team while I went back to the consulting side for a bit. But I'm not really sure what happened with it afterwards. But a lot of it was just kind of manual tinkering, kind of setting up those servers manually to configure it. For any of the like Linux-based stuff, pretty easy to just use Ansible to spin those up and configure it as you needed. But the Windows side was a little bit more kind of static, kind of save the configurations. There probably could have been a lot of work done there to make it a little bit better in terms of kind of dynamically generating some neat scenarios there. But yeah, it's for another day.
Fair enough. Do you ever have to write custom exploits for engagements?
Yeah, so yes. And I think it really kind of depends on what you're up against and that environment's like. So kind of as an interesting anecdote, actually I had a really interesting engagement a couple weeks back. The client basically tasked us with, and this was just a kind of your standard penetration test, not an actual red team exercise. The client had asked us to get into this application, which is a third-party application. And, okay, so that's cool, good goal. We were able to privilege escalate to domain admin. So basically managed to get to that point and romp around the network. But what was interesting was that you basically needed to have a client to interact with this application, and you also had very separate authentication for this. So, domain admin didn't really help very much. So I dig into the application server, start hunting around, and find a database connection string. So that's cool. You get into the database, you get all the data. So in the back door, basically in the back end there. So get all the data, but I still kind of really wanted to get in the front door as well. And what I noticed was that there was a table in there that contained a bunch of encrypted passwords, but it wasn't really clear at the time, what kind of encryption standards it was, what was actually happening there. So kind of tabled that, started hunting around for users. So looking at the users there and kind of mapped them to Active Directory. Started using my privileges to hop into their machines, just kind of hunting around to see if I get lucky with any kind of like password files that people are always leaving around on their desktop. So I got lucky and I found one, but the passwords didn't work. There was actually 2 passwords.txt files, but they were all older. But I noticed a pattern. There's this weird kind of got your password and then just a slightly different number at the end, which I assumed was the password last changed date. So looking back at the database, hunting around there, it indeed kind of lined up and matched with the dates that they changed it. And I guessed and I got in, right? So that's all great. Super cool. But still wanted admin. That was just a normal user. So I started looking at the encryption data, and I started noticing this really weird pattern, which I thought was kind of like padding or something was really weird. But it made me think that this was some kind of like XOR cipher or some stream cipher, something that could maybe be broken. And now that I had a plain text password, I could actually start doing some cryptanalysis on this to see exactly what was going on. So I was actually able to go back into the server as the domain admin. To my luck, it was actually a Java-based application, so I was able to grab all the .jar files for this application, toss them into a decompiler, and I started looking at the code for this. So what I noticed was that it actually wasn't being encrypted; it was actually being hashed. But it was basically what looked like a homebrewed hashing algorithm, which from just gut instinct looked extremely weak. So what I noticed was that pattern that I saw that was reoccurring was actually just kind of like a padding, but it was kind of used for the math to perform the actual hashing algorithm. And so I started analyzing it, recreating it, discovered that all of these hashes were 100% brute forceable and could basically be cracked instantly without any kind of word list. You could basically just, due to how the hashing algorithm worked, it gets a little complicated. I plan on writing a little thing about this, but basically the way it worked in a quick summary was that the neighboring byte of your password would affect the one before it. So if you can guess the first two characters of a password, you can basically then just kind of move over byte by byte and guess everything. And the real kicker was that when I was trying to recreate the hash, it wasn't matching for some reason. So I rewrote it, was trying to figure out why I wasn't creating the hash that I had of this plain text password. And what I found out was that the application was actually converting any user's input to uppercase. So it was basically ignoring case. And after I added that bit in, everything started to match up. So I'm like, oh, all right, that's cool. That really helps because now the key space is a lot lower. So basically, to brute force those first two characters, it's like something in the ballpark of like 4,500 characters or something like that. So real quick and simple. And then it's just 67 characters, different combinations for everything thereafter. So so it kind of went deep. Probably took more time than I should have, but I really wanted to get admin on this thing and basically wrote this brute forcer in Rust and just shredded all these hashes to nothing. So it was a lot of fun. Is that something that I encounter all the time? Absolutely not. But there are definitely situations where if you could script stuff up quickly, or you can, develop something quickly on the fly like that, it could be super beneficial and just kind of lends its hand to show impact even more for those engagements. So that was pretty fun stuff.
That's super interesting. That's really cool. It kind of reminds me a little bit. I think it was like SQL 2000. They just did like an XOR on the clear text password. Uh, if you were able
Nice.
to grab it on the wire or whatever. So going back to the EDR stuff, how do you weigh knowing how to avoid tripping a particular EDR or like a way to get around some of their alarms versus like notifying that vendor of like shortcomings in their product?
Yeah, so this is interesting, right? Because like I mentioned, I work for two different companies that provide EDRs and all that sort of stuff. So it's a really delicate balance because our goal is to basically simulate a really advanced adversary, and our goal is to bypass these security controls and not be detected as best as possible. So afterwards, when they come back and are like, "Hey, we're paying money for this EDR, why didn't it detect this stuff?" So it's definitely very delicate. But at the end of the day, we're not testing things. It's kind of agnostic testing for these kind of devices. But kind of going back to what I was mentioning again, these are unknowns, right? The EDRs and all these things can really only work off of known behaviors, or you can incorporate machine learning or whatever to kind of learn that behavior maybe better. But you're really working off signatures and kind of known behaviors and things like that. So I think a lot of people understand that it's incredibly hard to really detect things that are not known. But again, it's we'll take that data back and eventually share it with the teams to let them know, shortcomings. But it is also kind of that fine balance of, we need these TTPs as well to be effective, but we also should let them know because, it obviously enhances the security even more. So yeah, there's no really solid answer of, like when and how to do that in terms of kind of just the questions that we would get from clients. Again, it's just that delicate balance and hoping that they understand that, we're not trying to just only bypass, a certain EDR, coming at this from an agnostic perspective and trying our best to really simulate and work at a very high level. So kind of a tiptoe answer, but I hope that kind of sheds some light on that.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Plus, a client could always open a ticket with the EDR vendor, right? So,
Oh, absolutely, and we definitely encourage that as well. And for anything, I'm not specifically just talking about any of the companies that I work for, but anything that they feel that was missed, definitely helps to let the vendor know and get them on the ball for that stuff too.
so after you've already achieved all your goals in an engagement, and if you haven't heard anything from the security team of the client, do you start getting louder and louder until like they notice?
Yeah, and I think this will again kind of goes, will depend on the objectives and if we've already accomplished everything or we want to test certain things in their environment that we know that they want to kind of have stressed a little bit. Yeah, we'll definitely try to ramp up the noise. So if we've been quiet, we haven't really heard very much. They're not really chiming in too much, or if we have update meetings and they're not really mentioning if they saw anything, maybe we'll suggest too that we're going to try and break our kind of silence and stealth here just a little bit and increase the telemetry that would be output or do some things that would kind of appear to be missteps, heavier volumes of certain things as well. So I feel like it really kind of depends on the client's maturity too. If they're really wanting their personnel to kind of look at this stuff and kind of see and be able to notice this thing as a part of the whole entire exercise, as opposed to just an afterthought or after the report's all done, kind of seeing like, oh man, this is what happened. I think it's more beneficial for at some point to start having them look and maybe get them on our tail and try to evict us at that point.
So, what can customers do to get the most out of pen testing engagements?
So I would definitely say that preparation's a big thing, right? So making sure they're prepared and ready to go. That they're waiting to last minute. Oh, we got a test or we got a red team exercise coming up tomorrow. We gotta gotta get going. So
Time to patch.
yeah, gotta get going. But definitely preparations first thing would be good. Let the people know who should know about the exercise, get them on board, communicate internally and stuff like that. But really, is that communication and the stuff that comes after. And it really depends on like, the reasons why the client is asking for the penetration test or the red team exercise in the first place. Is it compliance reasons? Is it, are they really looking forward to, strengthening their security program? But I really think that it's important to act on everything, that they see in the report and engage more with the consultant. It shouldn't be just a one-way road where the consultants just, here's a report, and that kind of goes in hand with proper consulting as well. There should definitely be some kind of communication, conversation about everything. Consultants should be guiding the client through if they're not that familiar with the topics, they're not familiar with what's going on, kind of helping them understand everything, the content in there. Really, it's, after a certain point, it's really going to be beneficial for the client to take that stuff, really ingest it with the rest of the team, and hopefully extract all the actionable items and start, getting to work on it, whether that's patching up the misconfigurations that they have in their Active Directory or noticing where there was kind of a breakdown in detection and response, and really kind of using that info to establish new processes and putting that in, implementing it for the future.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's preparation. I mean, it's funny, depending on how big your company is, you could be preparing the whole year for the next one and only have like half the stuff done you're supposed to, right?
Yeah, it's not easy. It's tough because clients want penetration tests or they want red team exercises, and then kind of got to wait for that pipeline, where that scheduling fits in, and then everyone's busy too, from the company side for the client. So there might be fires to put out. There might be, something at that time that's just not predicted, kind of happened to come up at the same time. So it's definitely from a scheduling perspective and just everyone's time and resources, it's definitely a challenge. But the more preparation, the more kind of stuff you can get ready and the people you can get ready at the time will definitely go a long way for the kind of real benefits that you can get out of these exercises.
Right. And so sometimes I kind of look at the infrastructure in companies as you have the normal like systems engineering team that maybe they're building out VMware clusters or maintaining just regular IT servers like Active Directory. And then you have DevOps and full stack developers, and they're doing something totally different in the cloud. And a lot of times those two teams don't talk to each other.
Yeah.
What have you noticed in engagements? I guess between those two different landscapes, I guess the different techniques you use to gain admins of those environments or move around.
Yeah, so different teams eventually need to get involved, right? So most of the time, it's starting out as the security team is really kind of the main interface or the point of contact for these engagements. And then kind of as the engagement goes on or you're presenting some findings, that kind of circle of in the know kind of spreads out a little bit wider where they're starting to forward the meeting invites to other teams. And I think it really depends on, like you mentioned, kind of what you've touched and what you're getting into, whether it's, okay, you've got the Active Directory team, it's really focused on Active Directory, but the consultants also touch this web app that's in-house and they broke that too. So now we got to, like you said, get the app guys involved. It kind of spreads out. And again, it kind of goes into that internal communication stuff as well, where I think it's really important to keep everybody on the same page, which is a little bit more difficult for red team exercises, obviously, because there's really supposed to only be a few people that are kind of in the know for that. But if you look at it from the more of the penetration testing aspect, I don't think there's any real reason to keep it secret unless you really want it to be a secret. But if you're really looking to more flesh out the issues for services and misconfigurations or infrastructure issues, involve those teams early. I don't think there's any problem bringing them in and just making sure that everybody's aware of what's going on, so that way they'll know to kind of carve out a little bit of time because they're probably going to need to remediate stuff. So
So I think I've heard like stories of clients behaving badly during penetration tests, and where like you might inform them, okay, we got this trophy, we've got admin on this box, and then someone on their team like removes your admin and you're back to like square one. And so like, I guess, do you have any lessons learned, like maybe I shouldn't have told them I already have admin because now I can't go to step B, C, and D?
yeah, so it's that's another balancing act, right? So my mindset is, if it's something that's critical and it's just a regular penetration test, I'm gonna try to let them know early, just so that way it's not a surprise. And if it is something that's big, they should know about it and start to kind of get the gears turning in order to kind of kick off that remediation effort later. So I've been lucky in most cases. I haven't really had very many aggro clients. I consider myself to be pretty chill. Like nothing really bothers me very much. So I'm pretty decent at parrying. When the aggressiveness comes, and usually they're okay after that. But so overall, mostly have been pretty happy people I've been working with. Nobody too bad, but sometimes you do get people that are being a little stubborn or want to do certain things, and you kind of talk them off the edge and work with them a little bit, or they want to fix something immediately. And in some cases, sure, that might be okay, but what I've noticed too is that I've been in cases where they will act on something without having the full details of what's going on, because obviously we try to provide a good kind of high level overview to get them ready for things kind of ahead of the report, right? But sometimes we'll try to act on that stuff immediately and then break stuff, and then they're upset. So been in situations where I think it was for like Active Directory certificate services kind of vulnerability. They tried to fix something and broke Active Directory for a while. And
Wow.
then they were pretty upset. They're like, they didn't, you guys didn't tell us how to fix this. I'm like, I understand that you want to act on this stuff, and I agree. Like it's a good idea to start looking at remediation, but at the same time, kind of as a consultant or specifically for a red team consultant, it's incredibly hard for us to know intimately about the client's environment outside of kind of what we've seen during that engagement. which is really, sometimes you're able to go really deep. Sometimes you're accomplishing objectives, but it's still kind of shallow. So, we don't know everything about, the Active Directory and what links up with where. So if we're giving kind of high level recommendations for these fixes, really they need to be looked at a little bit deeper without just saying, okay, yeah, we're going to flip this switch and everything's going to be good. Kind of got to really research and look. So again, it's kind of delicate because we want to give as much information as we can for clients and what they should be doing to fix certain things, but at the same time, it's not a one size fits all, because there could be things that we have no idea about that are kind of affected by that in that network. So kind of just have to take that with a grain of salt and not get mad.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell us turn off like LL, MR or whatever, but they have like a Windows 2000 server that relies on it, or like NetBIOS naming
Yeah.
or whatever.
Right. Just turn it all off.
Yeah,
What could go wrong?
exactly. So I'm curious, have you dealt with Linux boxes that have SE Linux installed? And if you got, let's say, a shell on those, were you able to escalate privileges? Was that due to like a misconfiguration? Or I guess I'm curious about that.
So interestingly, personally, I really haven't come across too many situations where I'm landing on a Linux box, kind of either naturally or in a situation where something gets exploited and I'm finding myself on a Linux box. Definitely been in some situations where it's maybe from like an external penetration test where you find some kind of vulnerability in a web app or something like that, where you might land some kind of code execution, but never really experienced anything where it was super locked down in terms of, couldn't really do very much. And then in terms of just like internals, I haven't really seen anything too crazy in that regard, just in my experience. I'm sure they're out there, and it's just kind of the luck of the draw from what I've seen, but I've never really felt too impeded by anything I've come across on Linux machines, whether that's just like EC2 instances that I have access to now, or containers, or anything like that. So, could be an interesting challenge, though.
Right on. I want to do kind of a thought exercise with you. I know. I was thinking like, well, Linux is SE Linux. Like, why doesn't Windows have something like that? If you think about an application, should, let's just say it's IIS, right? And you know what applications on there, right? Let's just say it's a regular like ASP.NET website, and it should only be able to like write to certain directories or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I know you can set like permissions, like that IIS user can only read and write to like certain directories. But if you like a limited shell on a box, there's so many different priv-esque things you can do, right? I'm wondering why like nobody's figured out yet how to be like, well, this is an IIS process and it should never be able to do like XYZ. And then maybe like look at bare minimum like monitor sysmon and see like, if stuff's going on from that process that should not be happening. I don't know. I'm just wondering, why can't we solve this as an industry?
Yeah, so I would say that I guess kind of playing off that IIS example, there are definitely good signatures out there and good detections in place for weird activity coming from IIS processes. Specifically, if you're kind of going back to something that I mentioned earlier, like a deserialization type thing, or anything like that, where you're starting to get code execution from that process. So there's definitely some weird stuff there. If you're seeing some process calling out, doing some weird things that it shouldn't, obviously that's a big tip off. So there's a lot of things there that you can kind of latch on to. Again, there's obviously people bypassing things all the time. So it's incredibly tough to play that cat and mouse game, but I still feel like there are some pretty solid signatures and detections kind of based around that sort of activity, both at the network level and also on the endpoint itself. But I guess in terms of kind of what you were talking about, application whitelisting is a huge thing that is effective. But the trade-off is it's also incredibly really hard to fine tune. But what I found is that, and even though I haven't really come up against too many companies where they've really strictly implemented these things, it's extremely beneficial if you can spend the time to really sit down and figure out, what that machine needs to have on it only, stripping it away, and then building that whitelisting rule set. It's going to take away a lot of attack surface and a lot of possibilities of, okay, yeah, if an attacker is able to actually, breach this for whatever reason, whether it's from some, new hot 0-day against IIS, and they've got code execution, basically limiting them to that, and then that's it for the time being. If you're taking away all the goodies, it's going to be incredibly hard. Not impossible. Obviously, like I said, there's bypasses, and people are coming up with new novel ways to kind of evade and get around things all the time. But I guess to look at it from another perspective too, if you look at Mac stuff, Mac Sandbox, they have their own, sandboxing rules that you can apply to every application, which is pretty powerful. But if you put that in the control of people, sometimes there's flaws there too. So it's really just kind of making that time commitment and investment and time to really dial in, what's necessary. But it's a lot easier said than done. So
Yeah, definitely. Have you ever in an engagement come across a machine that once you compromise it, you realize that it's actually actively compromised by an adversary? Like, there's like a web chopper shell on it or something like that, and you're like, oh, there's already some people on here that shouldn't be on here.
I've personally not been in that situation, but I had heard stories from other consultants that have experienced such things, and it's that's kind of a red light, stopping the engagement, letting the client know, and then it's time to contact IR and get them involved. So that's kind of a showstopper. So I've definitely heard war stories around that, but yeah, it's a pretty scary thing, and it's definitely something that I think consultants should be aware of and be kind of attentive of during their engagements. Is if you are poking around, look for stuff that's weird. If you're on that machine already, if you landed there, and again, I feel like it depends on how you got to that system. But if you got there, who's to say that somebody else hasn't already done that too? So you might as well keep an eye out and help out where you can. So definitely a scary situation though.
In the same spirit, I'm curious, do you ever come across clients that don't know their own IP space? Like they say, okay, scan these IP addresses, but they actually don't own some of them, or like somebody fat fingers a domain name and you end up compromising something that the company doesn't own?
So definitely do our own due diligence to confirm that stuff ourselves, just as precaution, because obviously we don't want to compromise other systems. And that also kind of goes with payload generation stuff as well, which I'll come back to that and kind of get to your core question. But so yeah, I've definitely had clients that aren't very in tune with their own infrastructure. Might take some more time for them to verify certain things, or they don't know what's going on. Happens all the time. Not a huge deal. It's more, again, with that internal communication where that point of contact might not really be the full on, technical person, more just kind of leading the group, is not too aware of, like I said, IP space or all the domains that they have. And then they contact somebody else who needs to contact somebody else. And then it's just kind of the telephone game. And eventually we'll get the list. But, at the end of the day, it really comes down to that due diligence to make sure that, this is accurate and we're not just hammering away on some some web service that doesn't belong to them. But then when it comes to like payload stuff too, just as kind of another precaution, you could do a lot of good stuff with kind of keying the payloads to make sure that it's only in the domain that you want it to be, or it's only getting executed on a machine that is domain joined for a specific client or something like that. So that way, if someone else does open it, you're not just getting a beacon on a on a poor person's machine that's at home, and definitely want to be careful doing that. Got to stop, kill that, and kind of go back. But so definitely powerful stuff that you can do to make sure and kind of just protect yourself too.
Got it. That makes sense. So, what are some of the memorable engagements you've been a part of?
I like weird stuff, man. So I like the weirder the better. Like if the engagement is weird, I get excited. If it's just like your kind of standard run of the mill AD Privesc to the normal means, accomplish goals that way, hunting down shares and just logging in places. Yeah, it's still fun, but I really like it when it gets weird. So put me in the weirdest environment and I'll have a lot of fun kind of just creating a challenge and trying to get around. So I've had a lot of fun lately with predominantly Mac environments and kind of decentralized infrastructure. Something that definitely have been noticing more and more these days, especially with the work from home stuff and just newer companies that are cropping up, is that a lot of their services are all cloud-based services, and they have a lot of infrastructure in the cloud for their core kind of things. And then they're just kind of shipping their employees, MacBooks and stuff to work from. So pretty different dynamic from, the good old, AD joined systems. It's kind of fresh. I like it because it's this new kind of frontier. There's a lot more Mac research going on these days. Definitely something that I'm looking at a lot now is looking at what to do in those situations. But yeah, it's a lot of fun because you're basically starting in from a completely different kind of endpoint, and then hopping into a whole bunch of cloud stuff. So definitely been a part of some engagements where that was the case, and had a lot of fun doing those. So it's cool stuff.
So in those environments, if there's no AD and there's a bunch of MacBooks, I
Mhm.
assume like Jamf or something is managing them. But do those environments typically have a VPN? And are those VPNs, do they have flat networks, or are most of their like cloud services just have public IP addresses? And how are they protecting those? Or what do you see?
The ones I've been a part of definitely have VPN in order to hit their kind of core services they need to reach, whether that be the internal wikis or certain proprietary services and stuff like that that they have going on. What we've basically done, and again, this is more of the penetration testing aspect as opposed to like a full-on red team type deal. Basically, starting with like an assume breach kind of scenario where we're on this person's MacBook that is basically they've been chosen. It's they're kind of indicative of a typical user, whether that be a developer that will have access to certain services, but really asking that they're not kind of the high kind of IT person. It's more just your kind of standard developer role or standard role that most people would have access to certain things, and then kind of basing off of that where okay, so can we dump cookies, use their VPN access to then hop into other services? Do they have cloud keys? Do they have other things on their system that we could take advantage of, and then use that as kind of our foothold and springboard into the rest of the cloud environment? So it could be a lot of fun, but definitely in most cases there is some form of VPN protection. Definitely seen a lot of clients using like Okta and stuff like that as well. So that kind of being like the main guard. But yeah, it's kind of a variety, but I would say that definitely more VPN focused in my experience anyway.
Got it. What about like the I guess the new terms, SASE, the Secure Access Service Edge? I know that a lot of folks have been drinking the zero trust Kool-Aid for over a decade now, and everybody's trying to get to zero trust. What have you seen in terms of like when you're in an engagement, you see a product that claims to be like a SASE product?
Mhm.
Is it fully implemented like true zero trust, or is it still like halfway implemented, or what do you see?
Well, I've definitely come across, a variety of different products, devices and such that are trying to protect and implement those kind of things. It really going to depend. So I have not been impeded by those, but that's also mainly due to the way that I operate. A lot of times, and again, this kind of goes to how they're configured and what's whitelisted, what's not whitelisted. I like to proxy through machines as much as possible. So I don't want to run things on the endpoint. I like operating off host as much as possible. So just in terms of my favorite kind of TTPs to use, even if I drop a beacon on a host, and that could be whatever Windows, Mac, anything. If I have a C2 callback, I want to drop a proxy somehow and start routing through that way. So now anything that I'm hitting is going to be appearing as if it's from that host. So that host, in most cases, is going to be whitelisted for certain things or allowed, permitted through the firewall to hit certain things. So that kind of turns that on its head, right? And that also factors into potential MFA bypasses where there might be some allowances where if you're accessing, from the quote internal, there might be lesser scrutiny for that kind of thing. But really, the source IP is going to be that endpoint. So that means that I can now hit cloud services. I can hit, whether it be Azure, AWS, or anything like that. But the IP is going to be that infected endpoint. It's not coming from Australia or some other IP just randomly. It's going to be something that looks like it's coming from internal. So that kind of changes the dynamic of everything. We're not going to get blocked that way. So that kind of goes into more of kind of behavioral analysis too. Like what is this endpoint doing? Is this supposed to be doing this? The frequency of that activity, or even the callbacks to the domains that's reaching out. Where if you're trying to block certain things, CloudFront is a great example. If we're using that as kind of a domain front or a redirector, something that's AWS or that looks normal. it's kind of hard to just blanket stop all that stuff without kind of really monitoring the behavior and that callback frequency and stuff like that. So it's really tricky. So I guess I would say to kind of summarize is that there's no real silver bullet, in my opinion. It really is, you can have all the devices in the world, and that's great. They're going to help to certain degrees, but you really got to dial in, your network and look at behavior stuff too. It's, shouldn't be, well, I got these devices set up, I'm good to go 100%. It gotta look at stuff too.
Yeah, actually, that kind of makes me think about when you're talking about the callbacks, like with CloudFront and like any CDN that could be used for like a C2 and stuff. Being able to like, so it can be hard if you're like a defender and you're like, oh, this box called CloudFront, right? But if you're like need to trace back, okay, what
Mhm.
website triggered the call to CloudFront, right? Or was it just some random process, or is it like a hollowed process or whatever, right? So there's like some new technology going on now where they've decided that using Chrome and stuff in Firefox is not a good idea in a corporate environment, and they've created
Mhm.
their own Chromium-based like enterprise browser that's built for security, and it has a lot of telemetry data. So in that case, theoretically, you should be able to know which website triggered the call to CloudFront or whatever, right? And it'd be a lot harder, I guess, if you could tie all that data together.
Right.
It's like a sore thumb, right? Your C2 call, if it wasn't tied to like a normal website, a normal permitted website for that company or whatever. So I'm thinking maybe it'll get a little bit harder, but I mean, there'll probably still be ways around things. But I don't know, maybe there's a glimmer of hope. I don't know.
I think Dave Kennedy had a really awesome talk where he was talking about behavior, user behavior, kind of analytics and stuff like that, and painting a story basically, or creating a story that links all this stuff together. So where you're basically tying all your pieces together to make it look believable. So whether that be, from the whole, get go of all this stuff, where what file is executing this thing to trigger this thing to this callback. And if you could kind of paint this kind of believable picture, the analyst isn't going to really think twice about, it being bad. So if you do have, legit looking kind of chain of events, it's going to be incredibly hard to differentiate that from something where it's like, you know, something that's more telltale of like, okay, this is bad. Even though it's CloudFront, like the things before this, it was really kind of weird. So this is probably needs some further investigation. But if you're chaining all these things together to kind of make this story that's believable and looks legit, like a user would typically do something like this, and there's evidence there to support that, it's going to be incredibly hard for them to kind of tell, is that bad? Like I don't know. It looks like this looks kind of normal. It's incredibly difficult. So it's definitely tricky things, and definitely like to keep that in mind while I'm doing ops and engagements. Is fabricating that story around that payload and around the activity to make it look believable. So really awesome talk. I would recommend searching for that and checking it out.
Yeah, definitely. That sounds really interesting. It's almost like social engineering, but instead it's like SOC engineering, right?
Oh, it is. It is. It's 100% social engineering, but it's more just storytelling, and it's fun, and whether that be linked up to the kind of phishing ruse that kind of gets extended, or if it's just the payload itself, or something that you're doing on the system afterwards after a compromise. Yeah, it really is kind of just yeah, you're social engineering it, playing that analyst. So
That's really cool. So you were talking about Okta, not to pick on Okta, but it is pretty popular.
sure.
Well, I'm curious, like, so what do you see in general is the initial entry to a lot of companies? Just maybe over the past, 5 or 10 years, has that changed? Has it always been identity, or is it more identity now? Is it misconfigured MFA, password spraying? I'm just curious.
It's really a wide variety, and I think it's changed a lot lately. Where specifically in terms of phishing for initial access, it's incredibly hard these days with all the email securities and just the kind of time investment needed to really curate domains that are valid and good, have good rep, and putting all that stuff together. Where true, real the real bad guys, they could be planning these campaigns for really long periods of time, taking that slow kind of approach and making these things, setting up their infrastructure, letting it age, where for the consultant side, these are basically short and sweet engagements. Recently, it's really 3-4 weeks for like a red team exercise. Basically, it's not anything that's like months long anymore. I'm sure there are still some other places that do that, and that's awesome. It's just for a time's perspective, it's incredibly hard to kind of mimic that stuff given the kind of time frame there. Kind of got to play it as best as you can, but we don't have the luxury of kind of just really curating those stuff over the long term. So it's really going to depend on what the goals are, but I think OSINT's definitely important to kind of dictate, which avenue you should go first in order to kind of get that initial access. So if you do see that they have Okta or a lot of their services are really kind of out there in the cloud, maybe you want to do a cred capture campaign. Because basically everything that is involved with like macros these days and Word documents, you might get lucky. Maybe you will get one to go by, but it's incredibly difficult. Maybe you could use an HTA that might work in some instances too, but it's really all going to depend on that client's maturity and what they have going on. And again, I think it really goes back to that pre-planning and OSINT and discovery to kind of know what the best kind of avenue to pursue is. But I guess to circle back to the actual question, it's kind of been both. Sometimes payloads work. Sometimes you get lucky. I've definitely had a lot of good success with credential capture campaigns, specifically targeting like things like Okta or those kind of services where using man in the middle stuff like EvilGenX or something like that to get that proxy in between and ripping out their credentials by making a ruse where they got to log in somewhere. Had a really interesting experience once actually with that, where they put together a pretty good ruse in my opinion, where we were actually targeting some Okta credentials. And what happened was we actually got busted. Someone had correctly flagged it as a phishing email, even though I thought maybe it was too perfect. I don't know. I thought it was pretty well written. The ruse was pretty good, but kudos to the user who tossed that in to the security team. But for whatever reason, the analyst who was investigating the phishing email thought that they were in a sandbox and actually put in their credentials. So we get a hit back, and it's basically we see a username that is not any of the users that we targeted. So I go on LinkedIn. I'm like, who is this person? And it turns out, it's a security analyst on the team.
Wow.
And I'm like, is this, are these real creds? Like and sure enough, the rest of the kind of session data came back, and we were able to log in to Okta under this person's context. So what was actually really neat was the user did actually recognize that they got compromised or did something mistakenly after the fact. So initially we had access to their email and everything like that, but since they did have kind of a tile specific MFA active within Okta, we got booted from stuff like Office 365 and Azure and all that stuff. But what we did retain access to was Proofpoint. So we basically were able to use our access in Proofpoint to then send in a payload, and we just pushed it through Proofpoint and had someone actually detonate that payload. So kind of an interesting twist of event there, but that was an interesting one for sure. Mistakes happen. It's and it's kind of like what we we're talking with the client at that time is it's kind of good to have this safe space where mistakes happen here, to know that that wasn't an actual sandbox where stuff wasn't actually getting out or was actually leaking out. So they had a bunch of things to fix there in that regard. So kind of interesting.
Yeah, definitely. So with the Okta breach, first they said it didn't happen. Then they're like it was 300, something companies. Now they're saying it was like 2 companies. It was through Sitel, which was a company that was acquired by the third-party management company. And so I haven't read anything about how the initial access, if it was like just MFA bombing after they got credential stuffing, or if they paid an insider or whatever it was. But it got me thinking, like, if you have to assume that your MFA, like Okta, is compromised, right? Then do you now need a third factor, right? Do you need to have a Duo account as well?
Right.
And should that factor not be something you're prompted for? Like, I mean, should it be something like where I don't know, because I mean, even with this, I think you said it was Evil Gen X, right? Where there's like
Yeah,
a
yeah.
web form, like man in the middle. I mean, so maybe you need like a with FIDO2. Would that does Evil Gen X work with FIDO2 or not?
I am not too sure actually. Definitely have to look that up and see about that, but not too sure. But I totally understand the sentiment there about, yeah, how many multi-factors deep do we need to go to make this secure, because it's wild. You're bypassing multi-factor and all this stuff, and then what? So like you need like drops of blood eventually to let us in.
Yeah, right.
I think it's more of a question of fine tuning certain aspects that work best. Duo, for example, and you mentioned the kind of MFA bombs, right? So are push notifications to accept that stuff really a good idea, or should people be manually entering in codes? And my perspective, I'm more of a proponent for manually entering those codes, because there are people that will just say yes eventually when you spam them with enough messages. If you get lucky, does it work every time? No, probably not. But it is a factor to consider. Even though there are two options, I still feel like it's a safer option to have that code, because that requires more manual effort, and maybe it's a bit of a hassle for the person who's logging in, but there's always trade-offs. So it's tough. Yeah, it's tough. And I've had these conversations too with clients. Well, like, but I multi-factored this, and then we're gonna multi-factor the tiles now too after the fact. Like, what? How many layers of multi-factor do we need? And I agree, it's wild. Like it's kind of crazy stuff. So
Yeah, it's almost like for sensitive areas, you could do something like maybe in the Okta app, maybe like something on your phone where like, let's say you need to access proof point, right? And I go to my Okta
Mhm.
portal and I accept my push and all that. But then before I click the proof point tile, I go to my phone and I click like proof point on my phone, right? Let's say there's like some imaginary app. And then I click it, right?
Mhm.
And that way, like someone did have compromised my Okta session and stuff like that, it'd be useless because they wouldn't have my phone that said right beforehand I was going to go to proof point or whatever. I don't know. It's there's got to be some sort of another solution. I'm thinking, but I'm just kind of spitballing here. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. And you can definitely organize it to have MFA per tile as well for those individual services. But then it goes to the whole thing is like, okay, well, I just put in MFA for this thing. Now I have to do Okta MFA again for every thing I'm logging into, and it's that trade off between user convenience or that kind of experience versus trade off for security again. And it's it's a hard thing to. I would definitely say go towards the more secure route, but then people get inconvenienced and hate it, and it's they've got to understand that it's a necessary thing at the moment until some better solutions come up. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, that'd be a super hard sell for sure. I definitely agree. How do you avoid burnout? Has burnout ever been an issue for you?
Yeah, it definitely happens. Whether it's like a full case of burnout where it's like I don't want to do anything. I don't think it's really gotten to that point. I'm pretty good about managing that kind of feeling. Um, sometimes it's usually always fun to do this stuff, but sometimes you do kind of get in that rut where you're just like, I don't really feel like studying or reading about this thing. I don't feel like working on this certain thing, whatever it may be. And I find like to get around those things, it's just and even when it does come to whether it be straight up engagements too, maybe we're getting burned out from doing too many engagements back to back, and it's kind of getting boring. Um, Definitely go outside and get some exercise. One of my managers would always say like, make sure you're getting sun on your eyeballs, which is important. So I definitely find that exercising, getting outside and doing things too is important. Don't just sit at your computer all day. Make sure you move around. When it comes to actual like infosec specific ruts where you're just like, I'm not interested in this anymore, like I don't want to look at this, I feel like it's good to kind of just focus on the things that you enjoy. Don't feel obligated for certain thing. Like if you're like, I really gotta hone my skills for Windows exploit stuff, but I don't feel like doing that. Well, it's okay to take a step back from that, and maybe you're more interested in you know hardware hacking or something. Go do that for a bit and take a break. Let your mind kind of wander to where it wants to go, and you'll be better off in the long run and fresher. Definitely know I've spent too much time looking at something and got on the verge of burnout and just need to step away from it, and you come back fresh and you'll notice new things and kind of dive into other aspects too that maybe you didn't see from the first time. So yeah, it's like doing my own thing. Like I said, exercise, go outside, play some video games, just have fun.
That's great. Yeah, I think that's good advice. For folks that are newer to red team or pen testing, or are looking to maybe make the switch over to joining like a red team or doing pen testing, what kind of advice would you give them?
Now is the time. There's so many, again, there's so many good resources out there, and so much awesome research just being conducted by so many talented people. The avenues to really practice and study these things. Again, I'm mentioning things like Hack the Box or those kind of lab environments to just kind of test your skills and kind of learn in that hands-on regard. It's so prevalent these days, which is just so awesome. Like I'm always constantly thinking like, what if these resources were available back when I was in college, before I made this weird shift to a Japanese major, right? I probably would have stuck with it and just kind of ran with it because it's really interesting. I still remember the first time I was on Vuln Hub at the time and tried my first vulnerable machine, and I was like, "Oh my god, this is amazing!" Like I'm hacking, it's awesome, and it just hooks you, and you're like, I got to do more. Um, so I'd say it's definitely a golden time to get into this stuff, just to the how many resources there are, but don't get discouraged. It's definitely not necessarily the easiest thing to hop to, and whether you're coming from blue team or you're coming from absolutely nothing, I think from the blue team side, you're gonna have some different insight into things that just a pure red teamer wouldn't have. So kind of blue team, red team, we're all kind of on the same side regardless. And even though we're two different things on the same coin, I think having that shared mindset is really important. So I would say don't neglect the blue team side. Don't neglect the detection kind of mindset and that investigatory, kind of thought process. It's helpful. Red teamers might think a little bit different than blue teamers at times, but I think having that shared knowledge is super huge and really differentiates people when it comes to red teaming. So if you're a blue teamer and want to get into red teaming, use that knowledge you have. It's definitely powerful. But if you're coming from nothing, um, again, hit up these resources and don't get discouraged. Just get hands on, keep fighting it, get a good foundation. I think the most important thing for newer people is really establishing the kind of core networking fundamentals and all that stuff. You're going to be able to build on that and just kind of keep growing. So build stuff, learn coding, and then start hopping into more of the hacky stuff, quote unquote.
I like it. It's a technical term, the hacky stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, get involved too. There's a lot of great meetups and stuff like that, whether that be like local DEF CON meetups or conferences to get involved with to meet like-minded people. Discord. There's a lot of cool Discord channels that have a lot of cool conversations going on where you can pick up and learn stuff. Um, Read write-ups for CTFs or anything like that. Again, just get involved and get hands-on as soon as you can. Don't. I know when I was just learning, I started hopping into CTFs really early, and I had no idea what I was doing. I'm lucky if I got a simple flag from like reading the source code, right? I was like, oh, cool. But then we start breaking into more the harder stuff. I'm like, I have no idea what's going on. There's a lot of, what I would say like gatekeepers or kind of mindset, which I don't agree with, which is, the kind of try harder mentality, which is good for a certain degree. I don't think you should be asking for answers for certain things right away because it kind of detracts from the learning process. And again, that kind of hacker mindset to dig in, but it's okay to ask people for help. Like I think that should be encouraged, and I don't think anybody who's starting out would just immediately know like, oh yeah, this is what I need to do. Should I focus on like, no, I need some kind of guidance. So uh, find a Sherpa, and hopefully they'll be able to guide you and help you out. So I'm always I'm always into helping people and learn because I know the kind of struggles I had to learning this stuff. It would have been nice to have somebody to kind of go under their wing and kind of teach me some stuff too. But hoping that in the future, just sharing knowledge with people and help them get up to speed. So I've definitely helped a bunch of people kind of break into the field, which feels good. Anybody can do this stuff. It's just right amount of effort and have the passion to keep going.
Definitely, that's great advice. Do you have any passion projects?
Right now, I am getting pretty heavy into Rust. I think it's a really powerful language and something that's super useful. So I've been spending a lot of time developing some Rust-based command and control type stuff, really digging into more of the kind of code base for that and building that stuff out. Super fun, kind of just a little project. But yeah, I like making those kind of things. It's neat.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast today and share your knowledge. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. A lot of fun. Again, I will talk people's ear off about this stuff. They don't stop me. So
Cool. Yeah, maybe we'll have to have you back for round 2 or something.
would be super fun. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks.
If you liked the episode today and would like to help support us, please hit subscribe, drop us a review, or share it with your friends. Thanks.